Schönen guten Nachmittag und vielen Dank für die Vorstellung. Leider habe ich meinen Vortrag auf Englisch vorbereitet. Ich bitte Ihnen dann auch ein bisschen Geduld, aber wenn es bestimmte Fragen gibt, dann gibt es keinen Ärger. Bitte stellen Sie die Frage mal auf Deutsch, dann kann ich auch auf Deutsch beantworten, okay? So, gehe ich jetzt mal auf Englisch weiter. Ich glaube, ich brauche auch irgendwo diesen magischen Apparat. All right. Well, for the last 28 years, we at Sales Performance International, we've been working with salespeople predominantly, but also with marketing people. And I know I'm the last presenter before you're going to go and visit the, the stadium, and and then we, sure, we have the discussion first, but I know where your mind already is. And I know that I got a predominantly big responsibility to keep you with this presentation. Now, when I've been working with the last 28 years with customers, they're predominantly in the B2B space, which means that they've got long sales cycles, it's a complex environment, it's high-ticket sales prices, companies like, whether it's IBM or Emerson Process Management, or whether it is ThyssenKrupp Elevators, companies that have large competitive environments. And you've seen all these, and heard in one shape or form earlier today. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. And I know you've all listened to the Google Assistant speech, last week on the Google I/O. How many of you have seen that, heard that? Of course you have. AI is all over the place, okay? We all heard, Google Assistant call to a saloon to make an appointment for a lady's haircut, and, get in the time and all the reactions and stuff like that. Well, when I talk about those things with my customers, believe it or not, even the younger generation, they don't think their time has come yet, if you understand what I mean with that. They're not so much afraid because of that, because they feel that in their environment, it's not going to be that fast of a movement, that a seller, quote unquote, will be replaced by a bot or will be replaced by Google Assistant. But there are, a few changes that they specifically see in their world, and I want to change today. I want to share with you some of these insights that I get from customers. And as you are most of the time marketing people, I'm going to be a little provocative with you. So if you don't mind, bear with me. You can push back, that's fine, but I'm going to be a little provocative because I know in your companies it never happens, does it? The cleavage between sales and marketing. Right, where I see that marketing people think that the seller should do a better job, and sales think that marketing should do a better job in giving them the right tools and making it all available. And it's not just a matter of shape and form. And by the way, not only am I a partner of Showpad, I'm also a customer of Showpad. So I know exactly what it means to make the things available to my team, wherever they are in the world, whether it's in the United States or in Europe or in China. But predominantly, as you look at what I call, Sales 1.0, which is how it used to be. You go and find a customer. Hopefully, you can induce a project with an intention to buy, and then you can take them through all the stages they go through. Early or, middle or late. You stay with them and you guide them to make that decision. Well, we all know that that doesn't happen today. We all know that they say, don't call me, I'll call you. Sometimes I see statistics where people say, sales cycles are being shortened. I don't agree. The part of the sales cycle that your team is engaged in is shortened. Because you're often being called in when they virtually have already made up their mind. Or they're along the lines, to make up their minds. So you get in a situation now where in the planning or the latent state, or in the determined need state, and I'll come back to that in just a second, people want to be left alone. I don't want to see sellers. I don't want to be salespeople. I don't want to talk to suppliers. I want to do my homework myself. And then by the time I get to it, I'll call you, invite you in, and guess what? You have zero time to adopt. You have to engage right from the get-go, from the first meeting, no time to waste, because they know pretty well what it is they're trying to address. They know pretty well what are the alternatives they want to engage with. So as a salesperson, as a sales consultant, whatever the name is within your organization, those people, they need to be up and running with no time to waste. If you are in B2B seller, sales cycles, and you're in long tickets or big tickets and long evaluations, this is typically what people go through. Have you seen this before? Anyone seen this before? Well, you have, for sure. Typically, what you see happening is that there is 4 phases in any buying decision you make. You start on the left-hand side with planning or latent stage, determine your needs so early. You get into phase 2, evaluate alternatives, and then you get into the late, where people typically evaluate risk. That is not so complex. The crux of this thing is really in the 4 different factors that are going to play a role differently in different stages of the sell cycle or the buy cycle. And as I will show you later, it's going to be very important not just to understand where your customer is, but also the tools you're going to use are going to be different from one stage to the other. Now let me walk you through this in, I would say just an example, because basically every time when you make an important decision, also in your private life, these are the stages you go through. Here I am, 18 years ago, with a newborn son, happily ever after. I'm definitely in the latent stage. I'm not looking at anything to change in my life. Walking home, living in Antwerp, right next to the park, walking home with my son, being stopped by the policeman because I can't go into the street. So why can't I go into the street? Well, there's been an incident, but where do you need to be? Well, I live in number 20, so can you let me through? Well, incidentally, number 20 is where the incident was. Now, I'm not going to let you, live through the same emotions as I went at that moment in time, but basically what happened was that one guy decided to shoot another guy at the backseat of a car over a drug deal gone wrong. So where do you think at that moment in time where I get? Do you think that I get a little unsettled and I start to ask myself questions where I want to continue to live there with a small child? Yes, absolutely. That's where I get into phase 1. I'm bombarded, by, whatever issue it is, into phase 1, and I want to see, can I change, my situation? That is where, at that moment in time, you start looking and say, damn it, can I even afford to change? We just bought this house 3 years ago. I got a big mortgage on this. What am I going to do if I cut my losses? And, can I even sell this house to move out? These are the things that right at the beginning, when you're looking at any buying decision you're going to go through. And then you're going to figure out for yourself, okay, what are the needs I have? What would I be looking for if I move to any other place? Whether it is number of bedrooms, whether it is whatever, where it is situationed, what are the schools, all those things are where you start talking to yourself and getting through your list of requirements. And then the next phase, that is where you're going to start looking at alternatives. That is where in this day and age you go to any website and look what is out there in the area of my choice, houses, apartments, maybe a plot of land where you can build your own house that is available in the marketplace. You look at them and you make a short list, 1 or 2, and then you start negotiating and you get into the mode of this is the one I really want, whatever your picture is. That's where you get into phase 3. That's when I started to ask myself at that moment in time, what are the chances that that incident will repeat itself in the new location? Okay? That is the moment in time when I ask myself, do I have good schools in the neighborhood to get my son to? That is the moment in time when I start to ask myself, will I get a loan? And at what conditions? So that's where, in the last phase of the evaluation, you get through and you ask yourself all these questions. Now, if you look at the different colored lines, you see that in different phases, different things are important and other things are not as important. Right at the beginning, my needs are important, but as I get through my evaluation in phase 2, I see there is 1 or 2 that definitely will, match my needs, so that becomes low. Then you see that at the beginning, cost is important, and right at the end, it's going to come back up, because don't we all want to have the best deal? And then you see that the solution comes up in phase 2, but that drops down, because as you get through that evaluation of needs, you see there is alternatives out there that are going to respond to your needs. So that goes down, and the only thing that comes up is what? Risk. Do you think that any of your sales team members have ever been in a situation where they've been working with a customer, they're making an important decision, they promised them to make the decision by Thursday night, guess what? You can't get through to them. You call them, they're not there. You leave a voicemail, they don't reply. You send an email, they don't come back to you. And then in the end, when you speak to them, they say, well, we're not exactly sure we need to work with you guys. Ever happened? Of course it does. What's the first reaction? Shoot, I'm losing the deal. Is that the case, by the way? I say no. For me, it's good news when they start asking risk questions at the end of the evaluation of any buying cycle. Do you know why? Any idea? This is, by the way, the interactive part of the conversation, okay? That's when I ask a question, give me an answer. I say it's good news for two reasons. One, they're finally there. They're out of phase 2, and they're going into phase 3. They're about to make a decision. You know what the other reason is why it's good news? Do you ask risk questions to the one that you're not going to buy? No. They're too expensive, they're too small, they're too big, they're too cumbersome, they're too this, they're too that, whatever. You get product objections. You don't get risk questions. You only get risk questions if you're the vendor that has been selected. So again, this is the natural flow that any buying decision will be characterized by. Nothing to worry about. The only thing you need to do is make sure you recognize it and you act accordingly. Because if you act out of sync, that's where you start losing the alignment with your buyers. That's when you risk any project with the intent to buy something that you can offer. So in just a few minutes, I'll show to you that whatever you share with your prospective customers is going to be different depending on what phase of the buying cycle they're in. And by the way, I'm a strong believer that you don't need to sell to people. I'm a strong believer that you just need to facilitate the buying decision. Here's some other statistics that I haven't heard today. So as you map this according to the purchase stage, and you see the use of digital sources, you basically see that in phase 1 and phase 2, they're all over the web. That's where they're going to do all their research, 93, 94%, they reach out. That's where they're going to check, all the electronically available sources. When you get to phase 3, it drops, not tremendously, but it does drop with 10%. Here's another interesting one. We hear a lot about this generation, and not conflicts, but, at least the differences. And then you see, okay, we got all these baby boomers, we got Gen Xers, and we got millennials. And one would be inclined to think that as you start getting some gray hair, which I had at 30, by the way, 3 years ago, that you wouldn't reach out to the web to do your research. Well, not so. You can see here that baby boomers as well, right in the beginning, they may be a little behind, but not a lot behind the Gen Xers or the millennials. So don't think that those people don't go and search for you using electronic sources, okay? Same thing in the middle stage, in this sample, they were even a little higher, and then it only slightly dropped significantly, I would say, in the late stage, okay? Where they are looking for other means and other sources, to address the concerns. By the way, remember, what was the main concern in phase 3? That's another interactive part. It's risk. So the only question you still need to address is overcoming the risk of making that decision. By the way, is the risk real? Do you think the risk is real when you buy something? Do you think the risk is real when you implement SAP? Do you think the risk is real when you implement any sort of system? Of course it is. But that's quite okay, because the benefits are there too. So don't be afraid of the risks, only you have to help them overcome them. So, but the main, message that I want to share with you in this slide is that Yes, in different phases it will change slightly, but not tremendously as to per generation how people go and use for information. This is another one that we've seen tremendously, is that before it used to be we go digital first and then we go face-to-face. I do my analysis, I do my research, and then when the time is there, I'm going to call the salespeople in, and then I'm going to work with the salespeople from there onwards. Well, that has changed into a parallel behavior where you see that it goes side by side. The digital starts a little earlier, okay? But even as you have in-person contact, don't think they won't go to digital resources, because they will. So as you get into whether it is face-to-face contact or whether it is digital channels, okay, you have to be aware of the fact that it is, parallel, but also you have to make sure that you're going to have consistent, messages as your buyers' research will help them validate, the things they're looking for. All right. This is a test for your eyes. Okay? If you can read the words, then you get marks for that. But the main thing is that we're all looking at the end game. And the end game is making sure we can enable our salespeople in the much effective and efficient way, with the information they need. But then, as you go back to the source, okay, very often we see that we make wrong decisions in what we put in those materials. Only if you are selling to, the innovators or the early adapters, they only are interested in product features. When you get into the bowling alley, when you get into the early majority and late majority, as you all know as marketeers, that is when you need to have business-driven cases as opposed to just technology or feature-driven cases. You can't have a competitive advantage for a long period of time unless you can help project what it is your customers have gotten from working with you and your offering, okay? So that's where I really strongly encourage you not just look at, when you say defensible differentiators, it's not just related to your product, but you should go and look, and make the inventory of what sales gets back to you, what customers get back to you, what support, indirect or marketing and product management get to you, in order to start looking at what are the typical quote-unquote business challenges that customers solve with our offering. And that needs to be translated, using your defensible differentiators into what we call solution messaging cards, where you're going to make an inventory as to who can we project this message to. Another thing is, don't use the same message for different function holders. VP's marketing will have different needs than VP sales and VP operations and whomever. So there is a lot of tailoring that needs to be done in order to be able to put it into the right perspective and make sure that your sellers don't have just quote-unquote brochures or product catalogs, but also that they know how to go and position and to whom in order to address what business challenge or business issue with their customers. I'm sure you all do this, okay? You get from, your capabilities, and you get from customer experience, and you get from reference stories or business cases, and then you transfer it into what sellers can do with it, but still, just to refresh your mind. Because that is where sellers often think marketing is not helping them sufficiently. So if you take back this slide, and you take a look at what you need in different stages, that is where you see that in the latent, the early stage, that's where they will be looking for reference stories. That is where they will be looking for differentiation content. That's where they will be looking for white papers or thought leadership from any of you in the room, not just marketing as a department, okay? Blog posts, social content. As you move over into phase one, really determine the needs, that's where they will need capability overview. That's there where they will need to see, what needs you can help them address. That's where you will need summary overviews. That's where you will use questions to diagnose problems with a bias for your offering. So that's where you need to provide to the sales teams that sort of information such that they can go to the customers and ask those specific questions, to differentiate themselves. As you get into the alternative evaluation, that's where you got what they call in America the dog and pony show. That's where they look at all the different offerings out there. Then you need full presentations, you need detailed data. That's where you will have some white papers and demonstrations, in order to demonstrate what it is you can offer and bring to the table. And as you get into phase 3, in the late phase, that's where you need, again, case studies, testimonials, return on investment, and help them understand how the risk is there, but is measurable, acceptable, and how the business case is going to help them solve the challenges they're trying to address. So in other words, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Again, this is mass customization for sales and marketing, where you want to make things that are relevant, in every different case and in every different sales cycle. That is where a platform as Showpad can really come into play, and the way that we've used it, internally as well, is just make sure that we make available to our, teams, what are specific relevant informations for this specific customer environment, related and tying back to the business issue that we know the customer is working on. And that is really helping us tremendously, to make our teams more effective in that area. That is what I wanted to share with you.